The morning came in low and colorless, the kind of October sky that doesn't bother pretending it might clear. Out on the county road, a rust-spotted pickup moved at the pace of a man who had nowhere urgent to be, and knew it. The truck was old enough that its heater worked mostly on faith, and the man behind the wheel wore a faded olive-drab jacket over denim worn soft as cloth can get, before it surrenders entirely. He drove with one wrist resting on the wheel. His left knee, the bad one, was braced against the door panel the way it always was on cold mornings. The county market sat at the edge of the fairgrounds lot, and on clearance days it had the quiet, picked-over feeling of a yard sale at noon. Most of the serious buyers had come and gone at first light. What remained on the vendor tables were the things nobody had wanted: bruised apples in half-empty crates, dried flour bundles going brittle, and pumpkins. Hundreds of them, stacked against every flat surface the vendors had left to fill. The season had been too warm, too long, and then turned all at once, and nobody had bought decorating pumpkins the way they usually did. Halloween had come and passed, with less foot traffic than the vendors expected, and now they were standing in the gray cold, looking at inventory they couldn't move and didn't want to haul back. One man near the east end of the lot had already started rolling his surplus toward the dumpster alley behind the stalls. The old veteran got out of his truck slowly, both hands on the doorframe, and stood a moment in the cold air, the way men do when a bad joint needs to agree to the day's terms. Then he walked the lot without hurrying, hands in his jacket pockets, looking at the pumpkins the way another man might read a map. He came back to the nearest vendor and asked what they'd take for the lot. There was a pause, the kind where a person recalculates what they thought the morning would bring. He left with $140 less in his wallet and a truck bed full of pumpkins, loaded in wooden market crates stacked 3 high, with the overflow riding loose in the truck bed behind them. Large field varieties mostly, the kind grown for size rather than eating, with a fair number of small pie pumpkins tucked in among them, and a scattering of pale cream and green-striped ones that had never found a buyer at any price. The vendors watched him go, with the particular expression of people who've made a sale they can't quite explain. He had asked for no receipt. He had offered no explanation. He had simply loaded his truck with the patience of a man who had done hard work in worse weather than this. And then he had driven back out onto the county road as the sky pressed lower overhead and the first real cold of the season settled into the ground. Tick 1. He did not go to the barn first. He did not stop at the house for coffee or to check the answering machine or to set the crates down somewhere logical and think it over. He drove the truck around the long way, past the machine shed, down the rutted track that curved along the low edge of the property, and he brought the truck to a stop at the bank of the stock pond, where the ground softened and the grass grew longer and the water sat still and dark in the afternoon light. He got out. He did not look at the pond the way a man looks at something he is still deciding about. He looked at it the way a man looks at something he has already decided about, and is simply now doing. The first crate he lifted down from the truck bed was the heaviest, a stack of large field pumpkins, thick-skinned and dense, grown for size and not for sweetness. He set the crate at the edge of the bank and took the first pumpkin in both hands, turned it once to find its balance, walked 3 careful steps down the slope, and rolled it into the water. It hit the surface with a low, hollow sound, something between a knock and a splash. It tipped once, listed to the side, and then righted itself. It sat there on the dark water, steady and round, riding with about a third of its body submerged, and the rest of it clear above the surface, like something that had always meant to be there. He went back for another. He worked without stopping. The pond bank was not steep, but the ground was uneven, and his right knee complained on the downslope, the way it always did in cold weather, the old injury registering the temperature before the rest of him did. He moved around it the same way he had always moved around it, slower on that side, more careful with the angle, shifting the weight to the other leg when the ground gave. He had learned a long time ago that complaining about a thing and accounting for a thing were not the same. The crates emptied one after another, large field pumpkins first, then the smaller pie varieties, then the pale cream ones and the green striped ones that had gone unbought all season. Each one took to the water the same way, that brief wobble and then the settling, the pond accepting them with a quiet indifference that felt almost patient. By the time the light had dropped and the sky had gone the color of old iron, the pond was more than half covered. They floated in loose clusters near the bank and spread out toward the middle, in slow, turning groups, turning without hurry on the surface, orange and cream and pale green against the dark water. The whole pond changed in color and in weight and in meaning, though none of that was visible from the county road. Not yet. The brothers came up the county road sometime around 5 o'clock, the way they always did when the day's work was done, and they were in no particular hurry to finish being loud about it. Their truck was never quiet. It announced itself from a quarter-mile out, the diesel knock, the loose tailgate rattling over the crown of the road, and it slowed, the way it always slowed, when something along the fence line caught their attention. What caught it that evening was the pond. From the county road you could see it now, or at least you could see something had changed. The light was almost gone, but there was still enough gray left in the sky to throw a pale reflection off the water, and that reflection was wrong, in a way that made a man look twice. The surface was broken up and colored in a way that still water never is. The truck stopped, not drifted to a stop, stopped, the brakes catching hard, the way a truck stops when the driver can't quite believe what he's looking at. Both doors opened. They stood at the fence line with their hands on the top rail, and they looked at the pond for a long moment without saying anything. Then one of them laughed. Not a short laugh, a long one, the kind that builds as it goes, the kind that needs the other person to catch up to it. The second one did. They laughed together with the easy comfort of men who have spent a lifetime agreeing with each other, and the sound of it came across the fence and across the field in the cold evening air with perfect clarity. He was at the far edge of the property by then, stacking the emptied crates near the barn wall, and he heard it. He did not turn around. By the time the brothers climbed back into their truck, the story was already forming into something that would travel. That was how townships worked. One pair of eyes became 4, became 20 by the time a man sat down to supper. A truck stops on a county road, 2 men stand at a fence and laugh, and before the dishes are washed, the whole township has a version of it. The details shift slightly with each telling. The number of pumpkins grows. The reasoning becomes more absurd. The old man becomes a little more gone, and a little less worth explaining. That was the mechanism of it. That was how a community quietly decided what a man was. By nightfall, the word had moved through the township, the way cold air moves through an old barn, without announcement, finding every gap. A man at the feed store heard it and shook his head. A woman at the church hall heard it and pursed her lips. Someone said he'd always been a little different. Someone else said they'd seen it coming. The pond sat in the dark at the lower end of his property, holding 340 pumpkins on its surface and saying nothing at all. The call had come through the extension office on a Tuesday morning, 3rd week of October, relayed from the township clerk's office in the kind of careful language that meant someone had complained without wanting to be named. Concerns about improper use of a stock pond, possible agricultural code questions. Could someone do a courtesy drive-out? She had been in the job 2 years, long enough to have seen most of what the county could produce in the way of odd farming decisions, and she drove out expecting something straightforward, a drainage problem maybe, or an unlicensed structure near a waterway. She had a clipboard, she had a checklist, she had half a dozen relevant sections of state code bookmarked with paper clips. She turned off the county road onto the gravel drive just after 10 in the morning, pulled up near the fence, and walked down toward the lower quarter of the property, where she had been told the situation was. She stopped at the pond's edge. For a long moment she said nothing. The clipboard stayed at her side. The checklist stayed unchecked. The water was still and gray under the October sky, and on its surface floated what she could only count by sections, orange and pale cream and green striped, crowded toward the middle, spread thinner at the edges. 340 pumpkins drifting in a stillness, so complete they barely moved at all. There was no smell of rot, no algae bloom, no dead fish, no runoff problem. The water was clear at the margins. The pumpkins sat high and dry on their own buoyancy, skins intact, stems pointing upward, like a strange kind of crop she had never seen planted. She heard him before she turned, the slow crunch of boots on frost-stiffened grass, the measured pace of a man who walks carefully on old ground. He came down from the near field and stopped a few yards off, hands in the pockets of the olive-drab jacket, saying nothing. She looked at him. She looked back at the pond. She turned a page on the clipboard, then turned it back. She uncapped a pen and held it for a moment. She did not write anything down. There was no regulation she could find in her memory that spoke to this. Pumpkins were not a waterway pollutant. The pond was privately owned. The surface was being used for storage, which was not unusual. The storage method was unusual. The storage method was, in fact, something she had no category for. She watched the nearest pumpkin turn slightly in a current too small to see. When she finally spoke, she said only that everything looked fine from her office's point of view, and that she hoped the season went well for him. Her voice was even, professional. She capped the pen. She walked back up the slope without asking a single question. He watched her go. Then he turned back to the pond, where the pumpkins held their places on the still water like a patience even the county couldn't quite name. He worked the last crates on a Thursday afternoon, when the light came in low and amber across the lower field, and the shadows of the cattails at the pond's edge stretched long toward the east. There were 11 crates left, some field pumpkins heavy as river stones, and some of the smaller pie varieties that rode the water like buoys, sitting high and proud on the surface. He did not hurry. He had not hurried any part of this work. He rolled each one to the bank the same way he had rolled every other, deliberate, careful, one hand steadying from beneath, and let them enter the water with the same low splash that had marked every other. The sound had become familiar to him over the past several days. Like a word he'd said so many times it had settled past meaning into something just under rhythm. When the last pumpkin left his hands and found the surface, he stood at the bank for a moment and let the water settle back to still. The pond was covered now, edge to edge across most of its breadth, the pumpkins riding in a loose gather, orange against orange, pale cream beside green striped. No order to them except the order water finds on its own. From above, it might have looked like something a painter had imagined in a dream. From the fence line, he knew, it looked like evidence of a ruined mind. It was neither. It was 340 pumpkins on half an acre of still water, and he knew the number before he even opened the notebook. He pulled it from the breast pocket of the denim shirt under the jacket, a small notebook, the cover gone soft at the corners from years of handling, and wrote the count in pencil, a carpenter's pencil, flat-sided and thick, the kind that didn't roll. He wrote the number plainly. No notes beside it, no explanation, just the count and the date, the way a man records a fact that doesn't need defending. He capped the pencil and slid it back into the wire loop on the cover and stood there a moment, looking at what 6 weeks of patience and $212 had made. The pumpkins did not move much. The water held them steady. He walked back to the barn to put the crates away, and the radio was on. He kept it on most days for the company of it, voices and weather, and farm reports murmuring from the shelf above the workbench. He had tuned it to the AM station out of the county seat because the signal was clearest there, and the weather reports came on the half hour. He was hanging the last crate on its peg when the forecast shifted from the ordinary end-of-October language into something slightly different. The meteorologist mentioned it almost as an aside. A cold air mass gathering northwest, still far out, its shape not fully defined. The signal crackled once, then steadied. The veteran did not stop what he was doing, but he listened. The cold air mass moved like a man who knows he doesn't have to hurry. It came down in stages across the first 2 weeks of November. Each stage announced on the AM radio with slightly more gravity than the one before, the meteorologist's voice losing its casual tone by degrees. The way a person grows careful when the news they carry stops being ordinary. The veteran listened every morning at the half hour while he worked the barn, and he did not change what he was doing. He just listened. The trees along the county road went bare in the space of 4 days. One morning the oaks still held a ragged fringe of brown, and then a northwest wind came in the night, and by sunrise the branches were clean and black against a pale sky, and the field looked wider than it had before, the way fields always do when the year finally strips down to its structure. He had other work. He always had other work. The veteran moved through his days with the unhurried thoroughness of a man who has learned that tasks neglected in autumn become emergencies in winter. He checked the barn roof where a board had worked loose near the ridge. He cleaned and stacked the remaining wooden crates in the machine shed. He drained the water lines between the well house and the barn and wrapped the exposed pipe near the foundation in old burlap he kept in the footlocker by the door. Not the military footlocker, just an old farm one, the kind that accumulates the habits of decades without comment. The pond sat in its lower quarter and said nothing. The pumpkins floated in their clusters the way they had since October, the orange ones bright even on overcast days, the pale cream ones almost luminous in the flat gray light of early November. He checked on them every morning on his way to the barn. He did not linger. He just looked, the way a man checks on something he has entrusted to a system he believes in. The brothers came to the fence line twice that second week. The first time one of them leaned on the post for a while, and then left without saying anything. The second time, they both came, and they stood there longer, looking at the pond. The veteran was near enough to the barn to see them without appearing to watch. They did not laugh. They did not call anything across. They just stood with their hands in their coat pockets and looked at the pumpkins, and then looked at each other, and then they walked back north without a word. That silence was a different thing than laughter. Laughter is easy. Laughter comes from certainty. The quiet that replaced it had something else in it. Something close to the feeling a man gets when he realizes the question he was mocking might have been the right question all along. The radio that evening said the cold air mass had a name now, a system, a projected path. The frost advisory came through on a Tuesday. It was posted on the bulletin board outside the extension office by mid-morning. A single sheet of paper, typed, with the county seal at the top, and a handwritten note below the printed lines where the extension officer had added her own annotation in blue ink. Hard freeze possible. Second week of November. Advise all growers to protect vulnerable stock. Root vegetables at risk if not properly insulated. By noon, the whole township had heard it, because that was the kind of place it was. By early afternoon, the two brothers were already moving. From the far side of the fence line, if a man were to look north and squint, you could see the shape of things, the scramble of it. A flatbed pulled into the field. Two figures working across the pumpkin rows with tarps, the blue plastic snapping in the wind as they tried to weight the edges with cinder blocks and old fence posts. One brother going, one brother coming, back and forth. The cellar doors on their main outbuilding opened and stayed open for most of the afternoon while they hauled crates down the steps. Root vegetables, probably. Squash. Whatever was left in the field barn. It was hard work done in a hurry by men who had not expected to be doing it yet. The veteran did not go near his pond that afternoon. He had some fence repair to see to along the south side of the property, and he saw to it. He drove a few posts, replaced a run of wire, checked the tension with his gloved hands, the way a man does when he has done it 1,000 times, and trusts his hands more than his eyes. He worked until the light started going, and then he walked back to the barn, washed up at the outside tap, and went inside. He did not cover anything. He did not move anything. He did not call anyone, or drive to town for tarps, or spend the afternoon in a hurry. The pumpkins on the pond sat exactly where they had been sitting, orange and cream and green against the gray water, still, unhurried. The brothers would have seen that. They could not have missed it. A man working that hard to protect his own crop has eyes for what his neighbor is doing, or not doing. And what the veteran was not doing was the kind of thing that sticks. The extension officer drove the county road late that afternoon, on her way back toward town. She slowed near his gate. The veteran was not outside anymore, but the pond was visible from the road if you knew where to look. A low shimmer behind the field, a patch of orange that caught what was left of the pale November light. She did not stop, but she slowed, and she looked. And whatever she saw made her slow down just a little longer before she drove on. The advisory stayed posted through the rest of the week. She came back on a Thursday. Not in the way county officers usually came back. Not with a clipboard held out front like a small shield. Not with the particular cleared throat that meant she was there on official business and wanted you to know it. She came back with her truck running rough at idle, parked it on the gravel near the gate, and walked toward the pond, without stopping at the house first. She knew where she was going. That said something about how many times she had thought about it between Monday and Thursday. The veteran was at the near edge of the pond, moving slowly down the bank with a wooden-handled rake, clearing a run of dead cattail stems that had floated in from the creek side. He did not stop when he heard her footsteps in the grass. He just kept working, the way a man keeps working when he is not surprised by something, but not yet ready to acknowledge it either. She stopped a few feet back from the waterline. The pumpkins were still out there. All of them, as far as she could tell. Orange ones bunched in the middle where the water was deepest. The pale cream ones drifted slightly toward the east bank, caught in some slow, invisible current she could not see. The green-striped ones floated in pairs and small clusters near the edges, low in the water but steady. She watched them for a moment. Then she said, plainly and without preamble, the way a person asks a question they have been waiting several days to ask, "Why the pond?" He kept raking for a moment. Then he set the rake handle against his hip, rested his hands on it, and looked out at the water the same way she was looking at it. He said, "Water holds what ground lets go." That was the whole of it. He did not add to it. He did not explain the science of thermal mass or draw a picture of how frost moves along soil and stops at water's edge. He did not mention where he had learned it or how long he had carried it. He just said the thing, quiet and even, the way you say a thing that has been true for a long time and does not need defending. She had a field notebook in her coat pocket, a small one, brown cover, the kind with the sewn binding that holds up through rough weather. She took it out. She wrote the words down. Not the date, not a reference number, not an observation code, just the words themselves, in the plain middle of a blank page. He watched her write without commenting on it. She put the notebook back in her pocket and looked at the pond a little longer. Then she asked, careful and honest, whether he thought the temperature would hold through the end of the month. He picked the rake back up. He said he did not think it was going to hold at all. The cold came like it meant it. Not the gradual cold of a normal autumn pulling back slow, the kind you feel in stages, where the mornings get thin and the afternoons still offer something. This was different. This came like a door being shut from the outside, hard and final, in the space between dark and darker. He had known it was coming by the way the creek sounded the afternoon before. Not louder, not quieter, just different. A little tighter in its movement, like something running through it had changed its mind about going forward. He had stood at the edge of the lower field and listened for a minute before going back to the barn. He did not go to bed that night. He brought the transistor radio in from the truck, set it on the old wooden stool near the feed shelf, and tuned it until the weather station came in clear enough to be useful. He sat on a hay bale with his jacket buttoned to the top and listened to the temperature readings come in every half hour from the regional station 30 miles east. He had an old thermometer nailed to the outer barn wall, and twice before midnight he went to the door and held his flashlight up to it. 26 at 10 o'clock, 21 by midnight. By 2 in the morning, the radio man was no longer calm about it. He said the words record lows and county advisory, and then said something about pipes and livestock that the veteran had already handled 2 days prior. The pipes in the barn had old wrap on them. The one water line to the house had been draining slow for a week, so the pressure would not build. He had done those things without announcement, the way he did most things. At 3 in the morning, the thermometer outside read 14 degrees. He sat still on the hay bale and did not move toward the pond. There was nothing to move toward. The pumpkins were either going to be fine or they were not, and no amount of standing at the water's edge in the dark was going to change that. He understood this about certain moments, that the only thing left to do was sit inside them and let them be. The radio moved on to farm reports, then to something quiet that sounded like it might be gospel, then to static, then to the weatherman again, repeating numbers he had already given. 14 degrees, the earliest hard freeze in 11 years. Lows expected to hold through dawn. He turned the radio down, but not off. Outside the barn door, the night was absolute. No wind. No movement, just cold doing its work across the whole flat county, slow and indifferent, touching everything it could reach. He waited for morning, the way a man waits when he has already done everything he knows how to do. Dawn came the way it always does after a hard freeze, reluctant, pale, arriving sideways across the flat land like it wasn't sure it was wanted. He pulled himself up from the hay bale, his bad knee stiff from the hours of cold, and stood for a moment letting the blood find its way back through his legs. Then he walked out. The county road was still, no trucks yet. The fields on both sides caught the early light and threw it back white. Not the soft white of snow, but the hard, glittering white of frost that had settled in deep and meant business. Every stalk, every bare furrow, every fence post wore it. The world looked like something made of salt. He walked the long way around, past the north fence line without meaning to look, and looked anyway. The brothers' tarps had not held. He could see it from 50 yards. The edges of the plastic sheeting had lifted sometime in the night, or the cold had simply found the seams, the way cold always finds seams, and the pumpkins stacked beneath showed blackened rims along their bottoms, the skin gone soft and dark, where the frost had done its work. A few had split. Some had collapsed in on themselves. Their orange had turned the color of an old bruise. He did not linger on the sight. He had not wanted to be right about this. Being right about a freeze that ruins another man's work is not something worth feeling good about. He turned toward the lower quarter and walked to the pond. The water had not frozen, not fully. A thin skin of ice had formed along the very edges, lacing itself around the cattail stems and the muddy shore, but the open surface held still and dark and liquid, and across it, riding just as he had left them, were the pumpkins. All of them, orange and cream and green-striped. They sat on the water like something deliberate and calm, their skins unmarked, their stems still reaching upward, entirely indifferent to the 14 degrees that had crept across every inch of open ground around them. The water beneath had given up its heat slowly through the night, and the pumpkins had ridden that warmth like passengers who never knew there had been a storm. He stood at the edge for a long time without moving. Down the road, he could hear the first sounds of morning starting, a truck engine turning over, a screen door, a dog beginning something it would not finish. The township was waking up to find what the night had taken. He already knew what it had left him. He turned back toward the barn. He had a sled to get ready, And the county feed market ran on Saturdays, and there was still work to be done before the day decided what it was going to be. He started at first light on Sunday, before the ground had softened a degree. The flat-bottomed skiff had been stored upside down behind the equipment shed for the better part of 3 years, and it took him an hour to drag it to the bank, check the seams, and drop it into the water without ceremony. It moved fine. That was enough. He had rigged a long-handled net from a section of window screen and a bent aluminum frame he'd been saving in the machine shed for a reason he hadn't known until now. He didn't rush. Rushing was how things got dropped, cracked, ruined on the final leg of a long effort, and he had not come this far with 340 pumpkins to ruin them on the bank in a hurry. He worked the skiff out across the pond with a single paddle, collected the pumpkins in clusters, and netted them back toward shore, where he had set up wooden crates along the bank in 2 rows. The water was cold, but not frozen, just at that heavy, resistant stillness that cold puts in water before it commits to ice. He could feel it through his gloves. He didn't mind. He had worked in worse. By midday Sunday, the pond was half empty of pumpkins, and his back was starting to register its complaints. But the crates on the bank were filling with something he had not quite allowed himself to trust until he could hold them in his hands. He held each one before setting it down, skin firm, no softness at the stem, no dark collapse at the base. He pressed his thumb to each one with a quiet deliberateness, and each one answered back the way a good crop should. He worked through Monday in the same manner, slow, methodical, crate by crate. Sometime around the middle of Monday afternoon, a truck appeared on the county road and stopped without pulling off. He didn't look up at first. He could hear it idling there, and after a moment, he could hear the low exchange of voices, though not the words. He knew who it was without looking. He had seen that truck at that fence line often enough that it had become part of the scenery of the last 6 weeks. He kept working. The truck stayed there a long time. He heard no laughter. He heard no voices raised. There was nothing from the road but that idle and that silence, which was a sound he had not heard from that direction before. He did not look up to confirm what it meant. He didn't need to. By the time he carried the last crate up the bank and set it down with the others, the count was plain: 338 perfect pumpkins, 2 with hairline cracks from where they'd bumped the skiff on the way in. Not frost, just contact. He stacked the cracked 2 separately and kept moving. The market ran on Saturday. He had a few more days yet. The last Saturday of November came in gray and still, the kind of morning that doesn't offer you much and doesn't apologize for it. He had the truck loaded before first light, crates stacked flat and tight in the bed, the old springs riding low, the tailgate chained. He drove the county road at an even pace, watching the frozen fields go by on both sides, watching the frost on the fence wire catch what little light there was and give nothing back. The feed market opened at 7. He was there at 6:45 with the engine off and his hands in his pockets, waiting the way he had learned to wait, not against something, just inside the time, letting it pass through him. By 8 o'clock, word had moved through the market, the way word always moved in a small county, quietly and everywhere at once. Men came and looked at the crates and looked at the pumpkins and didn't say much. He told anyone who asked the price, and the price was fair. It was the highest pumpkin price offered at that market on that day, because it was the only pumpkin price offered at that market on that day. He didn't have to explain it. The empty tables around him did that. They came to him, some of them, men he recognized from the fence line, from the county road, from the auction yards, and the diner, where he sometimes stopped for coffee. They came without hurry and without words, the way people come when they are not sure what to say and have decided not to try. They paid what he asked. He counted back the change, right, every time. He did not make them wait for it, and he did not make them feel it. By mid-morning, most of the crates were gone. The woman from the county extension office appeared near 11, stepping around an empty pallet, hands in the pockets of her green canvas jacket. She looked at the few remaining crates, and then she looked at him, and for a moment she didn't say anything either. Then she asked, quietly, whether he was planning to do it again next year. He didn't answer right away. He reached into the breast pocket of the olive drab jacket and brought out the small spiral notebook he used for feed tallies and supply counts. He opened it to a clean page. The first clean page of the book, in fact. He had started a new one this morning, without quite meaning to. He set the notebook flat on the edge of the nearest crate, pulled the carpenter's pencil from behind his ear, and wrote one number on the page. 340. He put the pencil back, closed the notebook, and looked out at the nearly empty table, and then at the frozen fields visible just past the edge of the market lot. The land had said what it needed to say. He had listened early enough. That was the whole of it.